May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Please be seated. Today's gospel is one of those readings. Ones that both inspire and cause lots of problems in the church and for individuals. The whole idea that if part of you is drawing you into sin, to cut it off, to save yourself from that sin. But what does that actually mean? Is Jesus calling us to physically maim ourselves? I don't really think so, not given everything else he's said. Because, anytime somebody is maimed, anytime somebody is lame or blind, his response is to heal, not to remove the part that is causing that blindness or that maiming. So what is this? And in that section where it talks about that, I think the important part is right at the beginning. If any of you put a stumbling block before one of these little ones, what are our stumbling blocks? And how do we get rid of them? We all have stumbling blocks. I just finished this past week some time gathered with the rest of the clergy of the diocese. We had our annual conference. And one of the things that the bishop brought to our attention was something that is before our eyes every Sunday, but we almost never look at. The rubrics. You know what the rubrics are? When we're going through the Eucharistic service, you ever seen those little bits of red text that we don't say as part of the service, but they're there? They give us instructions. And before the service, there's a whole big block of black text that talks about the service and why things are in their order, and why those decisions were made, and what it all means. Those are the rubrics. And if you're learning how to do math, the teachers give you rubrics about how to do it. The rules by which you do the math. Not the math itself, but the stuff you need to know in order to line things up correctly. When you learn English, you have to learn syntax. You have to learn how the language works, not just the words. Because if all you know are the words, you can't really say anything intelligible because they don't line up right. That's what the rubrics are. And when this Book of Alternative Services was published, it was published with the words of the services and the rubrics side by side, the rules for use. And we often don't read those rules. And we don't think about why those rules are there, because those rules shape the service. And he pointed out a couple of places where throughout the diocese, and actually throughout the Anglican Church in Canada, we often ignore some of those rubrics and don't think about why they're there and what it means that we're doing things differently. There's a really easy example. After we finish the Eucharistic prayer, we share communion. We say the prayer after communion and the doxology. And I may or may not say a blessing. That's in the rubrics. And then there is the sending. What do we do every Sunday that I didn't list? You at least should know. There is no hymn at the end of the service. Because once we are fed, we are sent into the world. And anything we put in the middle breaks that rhythm. Now today we are going to continue and we have listed a final hymn there. But during Advent, we're going to try it without one and see what it's like and see if it means something different. It was very intentionally put that way, so there is no final hymn. And pretty much everybody in the diocese uses one. So what are these rules we have in our lives? The rules we live by are our rubrics. And what do they mean? We have all of these things that we do, and most of them, we've gotten into a rhythm, we keep doing them, and then we forget why we started doing them in the first place. Maybe it's time to re-examine, to look at our rules and say, does this rule have meaning? And if it does, what is that meaning? There's some pretty simple ones that we can look at about our stuff going on in our household. Things like, do we turn the light on first thing in the morning and turn it back off again before we go to bed? What about all that time in between? Are we using the light? And what does it mean that we've chosen to leave the light on? Or that we've chosen that every time we leave the room, we turn it off? That's a different rule. Rules about how we use water. How much we use. What does it mean, not just to us, but to the world? The amount of water we use, whether we use a little bit or a lot. For those that are on septic systems, it's something you actually have to think about regularly. Those that are in the city, where it just goes down the sewer, it's not as obvious. And those are just two small examples. We have rules about everything that we live by. And if we don't think about them, they lose their meaning. They may have been something that we chose to do for a very good reason. And that reason might not be there anymore. I know for many of you, you've had kids, they've grown up, they've moved out. Some of the things that you started doing when you had kids, you may still be doing, and they may not mean anything anymore. But we still do them because we like habits. We're comfortable with repetition, doing the same thing over and over again. And we need to do the same thing here in church. Look at the things that we do and think about, why do we do this? When we find the meaning in it, then we can also find the joy in it. And when we think about why we're doing it, we're letting God be part of worship, which is what it should be. Worship is God working through us. When we forget and just follow the rules, God is not part of it. It's just us going through the motions. So with God's help, I pray that we all, myself included, can examine the rules that we live by, our personal rubrics. Figure out what they mean, what they used to mean, what they can mean in the future, and whether they need to be changed. Thanks be to God.